Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I have a Christmas card featuring the Penguin Pals from the Gerda Steiner Designs rubber stamp Christmas release. I am going to stamp my own background pattern paper, so I'll start with die cutting a piece of typing paper in a size that is big enough to fit the two small penguin images, and those are sold separately, so if you have one specific penguin that you really like, you can get just that penguin, or you can get them all as a set. So I've started by, like I said, die cutting a labels die from Spellbinders with some typing paper, and then I'm using some repositionable adhesive to mask off an area because I want it to be more one layer rather than layering a colored image on top of the background paper. So once I've masked off the area, I will be inking up my background stamp from Impression Obsession. It is a pretty solid snowflake background, and I'm going to be using Distress ink in Festive Berries. Now, I know that Distress ink is not necessarily the best ink for solid stamping, and this is a very solid background image, but I actually don't mind the way it looks. I don't really see any ways where it's inconsistent, and I think it's partly because it's a rubber stamp, and rubber holds ink a little differently than clear stamps, and maybe that's why they don't work as well with some solid clear stamps, but I think rubber stamps, they work out fine. So when I stamp a background stamp, I place my paper on top of the stamp, I place a napkin down, and then I use a brayer to make sure that I have even coverage. Usually I make sure to have my piece of paper a little bit bigger than I want the final size, just in case there's any mistakes at the edges, as often there can be a little bit of trouble as you lift things up, where you might get an area that isn't quite covered as evenly as you want. And you'll notice there is a little bit of that at the top and on the side there. But like I said, I will be able to trim it down, so I'm not too worried about that. I do find that the brayer helps you to give even pressure, so if you like to use background stamps a lot, I'd recommend it, but you could also just smooth it out with your hand. So after I have a couple of these stamped, I will dry them with my heat gun. I actually wound up making several of these because once you have the background stamp out and you start inking it, I think it makes sense to make a couple of them in one go, and then I stamped a couple different ones of the Gerda Steiner images from the Christmas release, because there's a lot of stamps in the release, some really adorable cats which you've seen on my channel before, or I'll link to a video with them, and these adorable penguins as well. So once I have that done, I will peel up the mask, and you'll see that there is a blank white space for me to stamp the image in. Now there are two ways to stamp an image, a rubber stamp image. Well, I guess there's multiple ways, but if you're worried about the placement, I recommend something like a stamp positioner or a Stamp-A-Majig, which I have here. But you can also do without it because you have a pretty large area to stamp in. So I had already stamped this penguin, but I'm just going to show you how to use the Stamp-A-Majig. And once you use it with Memento Tuxedo Black, like you see, you could just spray a little bit of water and it comes right off. So I'm going to take the rubber stamp and stamp it onto the Stamp-A-Majig clear acetate sheet, and then I'll be able to lay the acetate sheet where I want it on the card and place it, like kind of place the acetate sheet into that corner of the Stamp-A-Majig and place the clear block into the corner of the Stamp-A-Majig. So once I decide where I want it on the paper, I'll move the blue part of the Stamp-A-Majig over there, then line up the clear block with the edge of the part of the Stamp-A-Majig again. So it's pretty simple to use, but it is definitely a little bit more time consuming than just stamping it directly on. And I find with these rubber stamps, it's not too hard to make sure it's straight. And again, you don't have to use something like that, because if you're not really giving it a background, it doesn't really matter if it's a little bit crooked or something like that. And so maybe if I was having a sky or I wanted to place a row of penguins, I'd be more concerned with using the Stamp-A-Majig each time. But since I'm actually just stamping one little penguin without a scene, I'm not too concerned with where he is placed and if he's a little bit cattywampus sometimes. So I'm just going to stamp a whole bunch of them one time because, like I said, once you have all the materials out, sometimes it's better to just make a couple, especially considering they're holiday cards. And we could always use another Christmas card. I don't know about you, but I always find like, oh, I wish I had made one for so-and-so. And so now I'm going to emboss the sentiment just to give it a little bit more oomph. And because it's also overlapping the background stamp, I don't want it to blend in too much. And by embossing it, I will get a little bit more of a prominence out of it. So I'm stamping the Be Merry from a Newton's Nooks design stamp set. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink. With VersaFine, it does dry quickly, but it stays wet just long enough that if you throw some embossing powder on it right away, the embossing powder will stick. And I find, as I've discussed before, that this is the best way to use black embossing, rather than using black embossing powder, which for whatever reason tends to stick more on my paper. Here, I'm not even using the powder bag, and I'm not getting any concerns with the clear embossing powder sticking. So my recommendation, as always, is to use the VersaFine. And you see that I'm placing it in about the same spot on each one, but the one penguin, as he's facing to the right, I kind of moved him over to the left, so that way if you look, your eye when you look at a card will be naturally drawn to any face in on the card. And so you want to make sure that the eyes of the critters are either looking directly at the person or looking in the direction that you want their eye to go, which is typically towards the sentiment or towards the inside of the card to kind of move their eye about. So just kind of a little art tip there. You want to think about where your subject is looking is where the person who receives your card is going to look. And so I'm just going to quickly heat emboss these, and then I will move on to the Copic coloring. I am going to be doing some pretty simple Copic coloring with these, and since I will be adding a little bit of detail later on, and because it's such a fine area with the scarf and the hats, I'm going to use just one color rather than do too much blending, as I don't think it will actually be that noticeable in the end. So I'm using W7 and W5 to create the look of a black penguin. Of course, you don't want to use just the 100 black marker on something that you want to appear black, because it does not add any dimension. And also, I find that the W markers tend to be better for things that are alive, whereas the C markers tend to be better for things like robots or something between metal. I'm not too sure about the neutrals because I've never actually worked with them. I just have some cool grays and some warm grays, and I am partial to the warm grays for, like I said, critters and other living objects. So I am taking the W7, laying it down, blending it out. I find in a situation like this where there is not a lot of space, there is no need to lay down the light, then the dark, and the light again. And in fact, unless you're using a really thick paper, sometimes that can cause a lot of bleeding. For the face where I want to basically it to read as white, instead of just leaving it white, I'm adding just a touch of C1, something like, I don't know if they even have a C0 marker, but I think that would be beneficial. And the way I'm blending out the C1 is just with the colorless blender, and it helps just spread the ink a little bit so it's not too concentrated. I'll use R46 for the areas that I want red, like in the hats and the scarves, and G09. There is a G marker, G46, that's called Mistletoe, but for some reason I tend to lean towards the brighter green of G09 when I think of Christmas personally. I think that the Mistletoe marker is a little bit more for the kind of green that you see in like trees and such, in plant life, which makes sense, it's called mistletoe. But I'm using, I think it was YR07 for the beak. YR07 and YR68 I find both to be good solid orange colors. Once I have them all colored, I decide to back it on green paper to pull out the green from the scarf in both images. But I'm still feeling like there's a little bit of detail lost. I've also trimmed up the panels. The green panel is 5 1/4 by 4, and then the red snowflake panel is 5 by 3 3/4. So there's just a little bit of border around them. And so to add just a touch more detail, I am going to round the corners with a corner chomper from We Are Memory Keepers. It's, I believe, the Scallop or the cloud. It has a scallop and a cloud on it. So, and I want to add some sparkle. As I've talked about before, I love adding sparkle to Christmas cards. I'm not always a really sparkly card kind of person, but with Christmas cards, I'm all of a sudden a big sparkle card person. And so I'm using some adhesive gems in some star shapes. I had thought about using sequins, but when I scattered them out, I didn't really have quite the right color. And also, I'm just not great with that kind of like that look where they just spilled out onto the card. And I try, but it just doesn't come out looking quite as good as some other people. Like I think off the top of my head, I think of like Nicole McGork, and I love watching her videos, and she's good at creating that look of sequins as a great accent, and it doesn't work out as well for me. So I am adding the stars in groups of 3 because, as I've said before, to have things in groups of odds are generally pleasing. And then I am ready for the final detail, but before I add that, I want to adhere everything down because I'm going to be adding stickles. And once you put the stickles on, you need to like let it sit aside and don't touch it because you don't want to mess them up. And so I think it's better to get the whole card adhered before you go on with anything like that, because otherwise you're going to have to wait and finish assembling it later. And so I have adhered everything to the card base. I'm going to use a white card base so that I keep it very traditional colors other than the black and orange of the penguin. It's all red, green, white, very classic Christmas. I'm going to be using Christmas red stickles and some green stickles. I don't remember the exact name of the green stickles, but it's very similar in color to the Copic color. Now, if you know ahead of time that you're going to be adding the stickles, you could choose not to even color it with Copics, but I kind of like the way that looks because sometimes you can see through the stickles a little bit. And also, just in case you don't get full coverage, I just feel like it gives a slightly more finished look. So that's up to you. And I am not remembering now if I put some frosted lace stickles also on the hats. So I guess we'll see in just a moment. But in terms of the stickles bottles getting stuck, because I know that's a concern for a lot of people, I keep all of my stickle bottles with the tip down, and I don't typically have much trouble with it getting stuck. So, as I suspected, I'm using frosted lace stickles also for the hat, because like I said, once I get sparkly, I go all out, and so his entire hat is covered in glitter, his entire scarf is covered in glitter, there's little gems, and so it's definitely a sparkly card, and I know quite a few people who would appreciate that. Funnily enough, my family kind of knows that, and actually my mom and sister are card makers too, and they know that I'm not a big fan of glitter, and so if they ever give me something with glitter in it, they like put it in a plastic baggie because they know that I'm not a huge fan of glitter. Anyway, that's it for my card today. I hope you enjoyed. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I will put links to these products below if you want to check out these adorable penguins from Gerdersteiner Designs. You can subscribe to my channel for some more Christmas videos, but also other general card making videos. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.